What's going on, guys? Zane here with Everything Vive. I want to welcome you back for another episode. On today's episode, we have a special guest, and that is Paolo Encarnacion, and he is from the studio Boundless Dynamics, which brought us all VTOL. And we actually covered VTOL in a previous Game Talk episode. I believe it was episode number 75, so you can go ahead and listen to our experience there. But just briefly, I was the one who offered my experience and my take on it. I'm not much of a flight sim guy. I'm not, I don't get excited about seated experiences, but this one was recommended to me by Damon and it completely blew me away. So we were excited to get Paolo on the show. And as you'll see, he's actually a one-man show. So it's actually very, very impressive to see what he has done overall with the game and the plans that he has for the future. So we dig into quite a few things. And if you're a fan of the game, if you're a fan of flight sims, I think you'll find it fascinating, especially the math, physics, and a lot of just the development part and science that goes behind it, which is something that I don't know too much about, but I love hearing about because that's what makes these games tick. That's what makes VR as compelling and as amazing of an experience as it is. So before we jump in, though, we are doing a giveaway for the game. Paolo was kind enough to give away 3 Steam keys, so we are going to do our usual YouTube giveaway. And so let's make this fun. Well, actually, before we get into that, the way that you can enter into the giveaway is through the YouTube episode corresponding to this. So this is going to be episode number 76. If you're listening on iTunes, Stitcher, or somewhere else, head over to YouTube, and there will be an episode number 76 on there. And make sure you leave a comment. And what we'll do to make it fun is give us your favorite movie with an airplane in it. My personal favorite is probably going to be Con Air. It was a fun movie back in the day. I'm not gonna date myself in terms of how old I am, but I really enjoyed it back in the day. So leave us your favorite flight movie or movie that occurred on an airplane, and we will randomly draw the top 3. We will randomly draw the 3 winners for the giveaway. And so, let me stop rambling on. We're going to jump right into this interview, and thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoy. Paolo, how's it going, man?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm Zane here with Ronnie. Ronnie, how you doing?
Doing great as always.
Hey, Ronnie.
Hello.
So, Paolo, we are excited to have you on. This is the first flight simulator game that Ronnie and I have tried, and it has blown me away. I know... I spoke about it during our last episode, the Game Talk episode where we covered it, and I've never been much of a flight sim guy, and to be honest, I've actually tried to stay away from seated experiences in the Vive just because I feel like, with room scale, that's what I really wanted to get into. But Damon, who hooked us up, was raving nonstop about this game, and I could see why as soon as I got in and started training. So let's start from the very top. This is your studio is Boundless Dynamics. It's just you, if I understand that correctly.
That's right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, how you got started, and then we can talk a little bit more about the game and the inspiration for that.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. So I got into game development like a long time ago. Actually, I used to make Counter-Strike maps, and I played like a little bit of RPG Maker, but I didn't really get into it until after I left college, and I discovered Kerbal Space Program. And I don't know if you know about that game, but it has a pretty big modding community.
Okay, and I definitely know of it. I haven't played it that much, but I know people rant and rave about it. I actually know a lot of like parents that play it with their kids, and it. Yeah, really cool. But anyways, continue on. Yeah.
So I just had so many ideas that I wanted to like turn into mods. So I spent like a whole like year or two just cranking out mods, and that's where I learned all about game development in Unity and 3D modeling and like texturing and programming. And then one of my mods got kind of popular, and there was a weapons mod that just added all kinds of like missiles, rockets, guns. to what used to be a very peaceful game.
That's what I was going to say. Like I saw the connection as far as like the physics and like I know, I mean, in Kerbal, right, it's all about building a spaceship, more or less, or like a rocket.
Yeah, it's pretty much just about building spacecraft and exploring the solar system. And I turned it into a war game.
I'm sure there were many people out there that were super excited about that.
Yeah. So that got me hooked on game development because like I really enjoyed seeing people like have fun and making videos and just keep asking for more. And yeah, so I decided to like direct that effort towards my own work. And
so when did that transition to VR then? Was there a switch that was flipped, or was it just kind of like a natural progression that led you to VR?
Well, I used to watch like a lot of gaming channels on YouTube, and there was one that I'm sure you've heard of them, Stress Level Zero. Like we're making hover junkers. I was like watching their development videos, and I was like not only does VR look really fun, but like developing for it seems like it would be really fun. So I decided to go get a Vive, and probably after the first week of playing the lab, I was like, I definitely have to make a game in VR.
That's awesome.
that game is magical. That game convinced me to buy a Vive. So
well, and I think that's really cool that you started experimenting with VR and right away, wanted to, I guess, direct your creative impulses towards that, since you had, worked on games in the past. And specifically, I think, I'm sure we're going to get to speaking a little bit more about what inspired you to create VTOL, but I think it's a really inspired choice to pick a game that has such a wildly different type of interface than most games. In terms of just like a lot of switches and different control mechanisms and whatnot, because that really is something that up until VR would have been very, very difficult to do that well in a traditional game. It almost, not to put it too much, like not to make too many comparisons that aren't completely one-to-one, but it kind of reminds me of what I'm trying to think, was Steel Battalion for the original Xbox, right? A game that require, you're basically piloting a mech, and in order to kind of have that experience of feeling like you're actually piloting this huge machine, they had like an outrageously complicated controller that was super expensive at the time and now is really hard to find, but it had all kinds of switches and nozzles, and that was the cool thing about that game, really, was kind of just working this machine basically. And I think that's one of the really cool things that VTOL does is, I feel like more so than anything, one of the most fun aspects of it is you feel like you are actually working a real machine when you're piloting the various vehicles.
I felt like I was learning how to fly, and so that kind of leads me to my next question then. Well, and to preface this, is VTOL the first game that you've developed for I guess VR?
Yeah, it is.
It is, okay. So, one, what got you into VTOL, like flight sim, that whole genre, and two, like do you have a background in this? And I guess those questions are somewhat related, but more so just the inspiration for the game then, and how it came about, because like Ronnie was saying, it's so intricate and so complex, but in the best way possible, because this is what VR can really highlight. And so I'm just curious how that worked out for you and how that kind of came about.
Yeah, so I guess it started when my uncle, when I was little, got me a joystick, and I would play like flight simulators and mech games, and they weren't really that detailed back then. But nowadays, there's like, for example, DCS World. It's like a combat flight simulator where there's all these controls in the cockpit that you can click on, and So that was really cool, but it's still just like clicking on things on your screen. So I wanted to do something like that, but where like you're actually in the cockpit, because there's the biggest frustration I had was being able to look around, and obviously you can use your mouse or like a track IR, which is like a head tracking thing, but you're still looking at a screen, and like it just seemed like like the perfect thing to have a VR headset for. And there is compatibility for VR in these games, like especially Elite Dangerous. You know, any kind of cockpit game usually has VR support. But since it wasn't designed for VR, there's so many things that don't work with it. Like you can't read labels or like buttons, and you can't see your hands. So like when you're reaching for your keyboard, you can't see the keys or the buttons on your joystick or anything. So I just wanted to have like something where everything just worked perfectly for VR, and that's just like the philosophy I had designing VTOL.
How difficult was it to come up with to design the interface and like I mean, for example, like, you know, you have the working thrust lever, you have the working joystick, you have a lot of those things that, I mean, they're all very intuitive in the game. You're able to like lock in on them with your hands, and like everything felt realistic, but at the same time, when you needed it to be a little bit less realistic for the sake of, you know, like I said, like the clicking onto the joystick, for example, like I thought all of that stuff was really smartly done, because it balances that line of being realistic but not frustrating. Like how was the process of, once you decided that that's what you wanted to do and you wanted to take those concepts of, like, you know, the cockpits and other games that were less focused for the VR experience, like how did you take that initial thought and actually implement it?
So that was actually the first thing I tried. The whole game started just as a prototype to see if I could like use the motion controllers as flight controls. So the very first thing I did was make a little joystick and try like just basically copying the rotation of the controller onto the model of the joystick. And it was like the first day, it just seemed like it worked perfectly. And I just like took it from there, because yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was luck, but the first thing I tried just seemed to work really well. And
I bet that gave you a lot of confidence as far as, okay, this I can do this.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's one of those snowball effects, right? As soon as you get something working, then you're excited to, like, okay, well, what else can I do with this? What else can I add? And I totally get where you're coming from. So it sounds like the joystick was the first part that you created. I mean, how did the rest of the cockpit come about? Did you do a lot of research? Do you fly yourself in real life? Not VR, but in real life? Like, where did the research come in, and like, what was the idea behind the design for the cockpit?
Yeah, so I don't fly in real life. I wish I did, but I basically just watched tons of YouTube videos, and some real pilots came onto my chat, my Discord chat, and kind of gave me some advice. And yeah, just like talking to people online. Yeah, just basically just a lot of online research into like how things work, and like why things are where they are, and just like how to control different parts of the plane.
How far does the sim have to work in VTOL, for example? Like, I know obviously the switches all feel like they're working real parts of the aircraft and everything, but like, was that something that you kind of had to figure out, or are there ways in Unity to kind of cheat around some of that stuff, or kind of how did you, once you had the kind of some of the working UI, how did you translate that to an actual aircraft?
Well, Unity does have a whole bunch of, like, it has a physics engine built in, of course. So I just had to write like a little bit of code for like moving a control surface, and then like calculate the the forces on it based on like aerodynamic equations that I just searched online.
Wow.
And then so like it's kind of like a whole bunch of like little tiny pieces that I just kept adding and adding and adding on. So for example, well, I guess like for each switch, I just set it up in a way that I could have a switch, and then like just switching it would change the value, and then I would have like a separate system like that controls the deflection of the flaps, for example, and then simply I just connect that other system to the switches, and then just like I don't know what I'm trying to get at, but it's basically just like a whole bunch of small components moving together, or like
Were there ever any instances of putting certain pieces together that kind of yielded really unexpected results, or?
Not sure.
Because that sounds, like I can just imagine, like when you're kind of inputting all of that stuff and connecting things together and all that sort of thing, that sometimes things might interact in a funny way.
Like those little happy accidents, right?
Yeah.
It's just like something cool pops out. Well, so I mean, you could think about that. I actually wanted to follow up real quick on what you were talking about earlier with some pilots coming on the Discord channel. I mean, that's super cool. So I have a lot of respect for the fact that like you actually don't have a flying background, but you went out, you did the research, you connected with, actual folks who have the knowledge behind this. What was that like for you? If there was like, are there any cool stories or any, like, what's the one thing that a pilot maybe said to you or that you found out that hadn't even crossed your mind and you're like, oh wow, I hadn't factored for this at all, but it makes sense now that I'm building out, a cockpit in a flight sim?
Yeah, a few things. So one, I was last weekend I was watching YouTube videos of people playing, and this one guy climbed up to like 13,000 feet, and then he looked out the window and he said, "Yeah, this is actually what 13,000 feet looks like." And I had no idea what 13,000 feet looks like, but just because I kind of modeled things on like real world scales and units, it just turned out that way. So I thought that was really cool.
Huh.
And then, let's see what else. Well, this one, there was a helicopter pilot that was on the Discord channel, and he was actually helping test out the game before I released it. And they mentioned that, I don't know if it was him actually, but someone mentioned that the roll rate seemed odd, and like I wouldn't be able to tell that because I don't really know like how quickly a real airplane rolls. But sure enough, he was right, and I noticed that there was missing, like the wings weren't being accounted for in like the mass of the momentum of the plane. So once I fixed that, it actually worked, or it behaved more like how it was how they expected it to.
How it would.
That's really, really cool that you're able to mess with the physics behind everything and the equations and get such accurate results. I think that's really, really fascinating.
I was just going to say the same thing. It is fascinating just to think about how intricate that part is and how granular you can get. If you don't mind me asking, and I'm just curious, do you have a technical background, or is like your foray into all of this flight sim stuff, like are you kind of just learning on the fly? No pun intended.
Well, I majored in mechanical engineering in college, but that was only for a couple of years, and I transferred to computer science. So I did have
those two will get you to a good place though. So
yeah, so I did have a pretty decent physics background, but a whole lot was learned actually by playing Kerbal Space Program because there's so many things you can learn in a classroom, but you don't really visualize it until you like see it in motion. And KSP did a great job of like letting you see like how things move or why things move according to these equations.
That's so cool. So I mean, that's you essentially taking your previous experience as a gamer and as a developer and bringing it into VR, or at least kind of letting that progress with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was like? Was there anything else that stood out from there that you kind of brought along that once you realized that you had the skill set for it, you're like, oh, okay, I'm glad that I was able to pick that up from previous games or previous development.
Sorry, I don't really understand the question.
Oh, sorry. I tend to do that. My bad. But I guess I'm just thinking like, I think it's really cool the fact that you were talking about this game that you had played a while back had kind of inspired you to get into the whole thing, and now was also one of the building blocks that you used when designing VTOL and developing VTOL. I was just curious if there's anything else specific that you remember from your time there, aside from the physics and dynamics. If there was other things that you picked up from like your early days, where as soon as you started developing for VR, you're like, oh, I already know how to do this, or it makes sense, or I can kind of translate this much easier, even though it's in a 3-dimensional space and I'm designing a game in virtual reality that I'm actually inside of and it's not on a screen. Does it make more sense?
Yeah. I guess like when I was writing the hovering autopilot, it's like a lot of it's kind of like real engineering when you go into like, because if you're not cheating and writing the code in a way that like like this is just gonna hover because I'm not moving it through code, but like it's actually being affected by gravity and lift forces and torque and all that stuff. Then when you write a control system for that, it's kind of like writing a real control system for a real vehicle. So
I'm really glad to hear it. It sounds like you really didn't use very many shortcuts from what it sounds like. as far as the coding went.
Yeah.
How long have you, I don't know if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been working on VTOL? How complicated has it been as your first VR project?
Well, I started working on it when I got the Vive, which was in July last year. Mm-hmm. So I guess about 13 months. Mm-hmm. And I was still taking classes on the side, so it wasn't like I was working on it every day. But yeah, I guess the main thing about VR was kind of just making everything optimized enough to have a decent frame rate. And like my computer has the min specs for the Vive. Mm-hmm. So
because your game relies so much on physics, does the CPU impact the frame rate more than most VR titles, or?
Yeah, definitely. So most VR titles seem like to try to optimize graphics so that graphics cards can handle them. But what I'm running more into is like you said, the CPU bottleneck with the physics. Like I have the fourth mission in the campaign has like 6 aircraft taking off from the aircraft carrier, and then 8 drones coming in to attack you. So for a while that was just way too slow to play, and I had to like figure out ways to optimize the physics to make it playable. And I still have to do more work on that actually, because some people are saying the frame rate's too low.
That's really interesting. Are you able to use like multiple threads on a CPU in order to kind of like get past that, or like what's the best way? Like, is it easy to account for different types of CPUs out there, or?
Well, the problem with Unity is you can't directly interact with it with multiple threads. So, because I guess just the engine isn't multi-thread safe.
Okay.
But yeah, so the only way to kind of optimize the physics would just to be like using in-engine techniques, like having not too many colliders on a certain part, or
basically getting it down to what's essential and what isn't, and then
exactly.
going from there. Huh, interesting. Yeah, because I would imagine that for a lot of people, CPU bottlenecks in VR really aren't that big of an issue. Like most of the time, it's all about the GPU bottlenecks. So that's actually really interesting. Huh. Well, that's cool. Yeah, no. Hopefully, I mean, everything seemed like it was running well when we were playing on, I guess, a 6700K, but everything was running pretty smoothly for us.
Yeah, I haven't had any issues yet, so.
And granted, that's like on the higher end spec, but still, like it. Yeah, I mean, I guess to some extent, if Unity doesn't really support multi-threading that much, I mean, there probably isn't a huge difference between the low end VR CPU spec and the high end. Like to some extent, a lot of the CPUs are kind of roughly what? There's probably like a 20 or 30% difference between the lowest and the highest.
Yeah. I can't be.
But yeah, that is interesting. So, but yeah, what in general, what was it like? Because you did say that part of what inspired you to move over to VR is just that it looked like it would be a lot of fun to develop for. What were some of your early impressions of working on a VR title versus like a lot of the mod work and stuff that you had done previously?
Well, it's a lot different when you have like that full view perspective, and at first actually it was really annoying to like have to put on the headset and take it off every time you want to fix something. But like say I was 3D modeling the helmet, or my friend was, and I was helping him. When I put it on in the game, it didn't look at all how I expected it to. So those are like there's just things that you wouldn't consider unless you have two eyes in the game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you really, there's no way of knowing it until you actually try it out, kind of thing.
Yeah, and then like just being able to move around.
And what's it like? I mean, going from developing a lot of mods and stuff to developing a sole product, like was it a lot more challenging to be starting from scratch and coming up with ideas of like how you wanted everything from A to Z? Or because I'm not familiar with a lot of the mod content you've put out, so I'm not sure like if some of those are like I don't know if you refer to them as total conversions or like if they're like complete in and of themselves. But like what was that like working on like having to come up with something from scratch?
Yeah, so my mods were definitely just add-ons, and I hadn't had to dive that deep into like how the game works at its core. So it was a big change, and but I kind of liked it because I knew exactly like how everything worked because I'm the one who wrote it, and I was able to like just if I find a bug, I know where to look for it, and I don't have to like email a developer or something.
Yeah.
It's just great having full control over the whole project.
Very cool.
Cool. So I know the game is currently in early access, and when going through, there were several areas with coming soon, but looking ahead, what's the roadmap looking like for you right now? Is there a timeline? Is there something that you can kind of speak to? I don't know if you keep it close to the chest. I know most people are, actually it's just kind of all over the place, but just curious where your head's at and what you're thinking about in terms of where you want this game to go in the future.
So I'm focusing on single player, and I'll be finishing the campaign or at least one campaign for the VTOL aircraft. And I kind of just want it to be like a testing ground and just see like how people or what people think about the kind of missions that are there, and like what works and what doesn't. And then I will probably make either a new campaign based on that feedback, or just improve what's there, or like do something completely different if like people just think it sucks. Like some people were suggesting having just dynamic or randomly generated missions. And I feel like that would be pretty cool. But aside from that, I'm pretty much 80% done working on a fighter jet, and a lot of people have been asking for that.
That sounds cool.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
I can't wait to try that one. I mean, so Damon was actually, we were speaking with him beforehand, and he was telling us about just some of the posts and requests that people are asking for in the subreddit for the game, like rudder pedals, music players in the plane. Like, what else is there? Are there any other like random features or requests that you found where you're like, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna take a stab at that, or here's some fan service type of thing. Just curious about like the less or the more trivial parts of being in an airplane. These would be the luxury parts of being in the plane, I guess.
Yeah, so I put in the MP3 music player yesterday in a patch. So that's out now.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And then for the rudders, I have to buy rudders because I don't have any. I can't make it work without actually having rudders to play with. But yeah, I'll definitely have something like that in the future.
I feel like you should put that out on if anyone that really wants to help the cause, maybe they could send you something.
Yeah, and another thing that people were asking, or they said that was like an essential feature, was being able to touch the bobblehead.
Oh, that's actually hilarious you say that, because when I first was doing the training, one of the first things I did was try to go and hit the bobblehead. And we started laughing, and we were like, man, we should tell him about that.
I was watching along as he did that, and I was like, oh, that'd be so funny. But now here you go mentioning it, so definitely gotta make that happen, man. Everybody, as soon as they get loaded up in the plane like that, everybody just wants to touch the bobblehead.
Yeah. So something funny about that. I thought it would be pretty trivial to do, just like have a hitbox or a collider on the head, and then be able to smack it with your hand. But since it's like actually physically attached to the airplane, and your hands don't have any feedback, you can just keep lifting the bobblehead, and it'll lift the front of the aircraft. So I have to find like some other way to get around that.
That's really funny. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, pretty much everything else was working correctly in the physical physical realities of the game. The bobblehead, who would have known?
Yeah.
Bobblehead is the key to moving the plane in ways that you would never imagine.
Well, that's really cool that you're working on a fighter jet. Like, how complicated was that to implement? I mean, it's not implemented yet, but it sounds like you're really close. How complicated was doing a fighter jet compared to some of the other aircraft that you've done so far?
Well, I was able to move like most of the systems from the VTOL to the fighter, so it wasn't too complicated other than having a different model and adjusting the values. Like the wings will have more lift and the engines will be stronger. So it really isn't like much of a difference in terms of developing it compared to the VTOL.
And again, everything just kind of once you modify those values and everything, it kind of works how you expect it to, and
yeah,
that's really cool.
No, I agree 100%. So I have a couple questions, but they're not VTOL related. They're a little bit more VR related, and I guess I'm just curious. I want to get your thoughts, and maybe maybe let's start at this, because there's a lot of VR development teams out there, but obviously you're running the whole thing by yourself, and I think kudos first for that. I know that there are a lot of other developers or aspiring developers out there. I know that they actually listen to this show. Just wondering if you can provide maybe a couple tips, or maybe even just pitfalls to avoid, things that you've kind of learned along the way, being a one-man show, because trust me, I can understand, like, it's much harder when you don't have that team around you. And so therefore it speaks even more to what you've been able to do, putting out the game and the content that you have so far just on your own. So, for other developers out there who are maybe scared to get their feet wet or whatever the case might be, I just thought maybe you could share something that, something that surprised you, something that you didn't really think about, but, you maybe give it as advice to aspiring developers.
I guess the major advice would just be not to give up. And you like your game looks like shit in the. Oh, sorry, excuse my language. Like your game
No,
is
you're
really
fine.
crappy.
You're
okay.
fine, man.
Yeah, so it's always gonna look really crappy at first, and you're gonna think like this isn't gonna go anywhere. And usually it does. It doesn't go anywhere. But if you keep trying and keep trying, something will like stick. And another thing I would like to say is to let people try what you're making, and to do that early. So I had a friend in Germany actually who I would just send builds to, and he would just play and give me feedback. And eventually I just put out an invitation for like volunteer testers even before early access. And it was just incredibly helpful to have people try the game and give feedback. So, yeah.
I guess since we're getting back into the game now, but what was there a point when you thought to yourself, okay, the game is now ready for early access? I'm ready, or I think that it's ready enough to open up to the public, and anybody who has a Steam account and a Vive will be able to get it. What was that level? How did you reach that conclusion? What was that decision like for you? I don't know if you can provide any insight on that, and maybe just where the game was at the time when you released it, because I know you've released a couple different patches and updates since.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to do it pretty early, even though it has a long way to be before being finished, because since VR is kind of like is a really new thing, and the control scheme I had hasn't been done before. I wanted people's like feedback early in the process, so I just wanted to have enough that people could play different kind of scenarios, and kind of like get a feel for how the control system works in different areas, and like just enough that people have something to give feedback on, because the earlier the better. Like if I didn't release it until it was completely done, and it turns out no one liked how the joystick worked, that would be really bad. So I wanted to have a really early access release.
Well, and I think one of the, like you kind of you spoke to this, I thought really well. One of the cool things about VTOL, especially in the Vive community, is that I think your control scheme, the unique way that you went about making sure that you could enjoy the game using just Vive controllers, really opens up the game to a lot of people like Zane and I, who aren't already like hardcore flight sim enthusiasts. We don't have, like, I don't have a HOTAS, I don't have joysticks or anything like that. A lot of the other types of games out there, whether it's VR or not in VR, I don't feel, necessarily encouraged to go and try out, because, there's such a huge, barrier to entry. And for VTOL, I mean, assuming you have a Vive, you're really, you're encouraged to go and try it out. And I think VTOL has the capability of bringing a lot of people into those types of games that wouldn't have otherwise gotten to play them. So kudos to you for finding a way to make a game like that approachable for people, and doing so in a way that that doesn't dumb down the experience. It's not, it's accessible, but it's also teaching people kind of what these types of games are all about. So
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and just to piggyback off of that, what you were talking about before or earlier in the interview, and also before we even jumped on this call, I'm talking about Ronnie and my conversation. It was just the idea that, Ronnie, remember you were saying you would need all this equipment, and yeah, I'm like the type of person, I'm sure a lot of other folks out there aren't going to be investing in that unless they're super passionate. And I think it's the power of VR.
Maybe people will try VTOL and eventually end up getting a lot of that stuff. But really, like, there's no way of knowing until you get a chance to try it.
Or the other thing too is just like some of that stuff becomes irrelevant now. If you think about it, like if you can do everything in VR, and I again, this is obviously more gamified, but we've spoken with other folks in VR that do all types of training things. Like it's actually really incredible what you've been able to do in terms of translating all of that and making it, as Ronnie said, accessible for the general public. Because I'll be the first person to raise my hand and say that I was never into those types of games, really, and just because I didn't have the equipment, didn't have exposure to it. But it being in VR, me having a Vive, obviously, but it being in VR and being as cool and as complicated as it was, like I don't want that to scare anyone off. Like I actually appreciate the intricacies of games like this, and if you don't mind me saying, like I'm going to compare it to another game that Ronnie and I and Damon have really raved about, and that was Iron Wolf. I don't know if you've had a chance to play that, but that's the submarine one, which is similar in the sense you actually have to learn how to drive that thing and how to operate it. And so this being translated or almost on a parallel line, being a flight simulator and actually getting in, it was so incredibly satisfying the first time I took off, and then the first time I landed, because the first time I took off, I didn't land smoothly. In fact, it took me a couple of tries, but being able to go through that, like, there's just something else about it. So definitely want to tip my hat to you for the type of experience that you've created.
Thank you.
So, well, we're talking about the game again. I wanted to get more into VR, but
yeah.
Let's transition back to that. I got a couple questions. So you developed some non-VR titles. You developed some, and now you're developing VTOL. Was there any like unique challenge that you came across, something that you had to translate? And I know you maybe brushed upon this earlier, but I just wanted to ask in a little bit more of a direct way. Something unique that kind of came about that really stuck out between the two types of development for you.
I guess I don't know. Like to me, it actually wasn't like, besides the things I mentioned before about like your perspective and having to take off the headset to work on it.
On and off.
And you're not the first developer to mention that too. So it definitely seems like something everybody goes through, obviously.
Yeah. It wasn't too different. I guess just that you don't have keyboard inputs, and moving your arms itself is an input. Makes you think about controlling things a little differently. Yeah, I mean,
was the development environment like? Are the resources out there for VR development? I don't think I've heard from a lot of developers lately. Thinking back to a few months ago when we were talking to people that were kind of developing titles right around when the Vive came out. One of the big things was the fact that there just wasn't a lot of information out there yet as to what worked and what didn't work. I didn't know if you could give us kind of a somewhat updated snapshot on that. I mean, you've been developing VTOL since the Vive initially came out. What do you think about about how a lot of developer resources have evolved, from when VR first came out till now?
Well, I'll be honest, I haven't been keeping up with the developer resources.
Sure.
I just
doing it on your own, huh? I like it.
Yeah, if I need something to work, I'll just write the code for it.
Fair enough.
But I have been seeing that there are toolkits and libraries that people rave about. So I'm sure there's plenty of things to work with. But all the switches and the buttons and the knobs you twist, I'm sure there's libraries out there that have that kind of functionality, but I just rolled my own. So,
as far as developing VTOL and developing in VR so far, I know as a developer working on current platforms, I'm sure you're kind of just geared into what you're able to do with what's in front of you. But what are some of the things that you kind of wish you had in the VR space? As far as capabilities of the hardware and that sort of thing, and what are some of your thoughts looking forward as to some of these companies are working on self-contained units that don't really need a separate PC to run and all this kind of set. Like as far as what are you kind of looking forward to in the VR landscape going forward?
One thing that like I have the most issues with is the difference in the controllers. So like I'm developing for both the Oculus and the Vive, and they have different thumb controls. Like one has a touchpad, one has a joystick, or a thumbstick, and then one has one more button than the other. So I guess as VR moves forward, I kind of wish that there's a more standardized like controller.
Okay.
But I guess like there's still so many things that they're experimenting with. Like there's gloves and there's the hand tracking coming out.
Yeah.
And there's the knuckles controller. So since like no one really knows the best way and they're still experimenting, it'll be like a while before there's like a standard way to go. Because like we're used to having PS2 or PS3, like PlayStation and Xbox controllers are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And like GameCube controllers. So now like every platform for VR has a different controller, and it's kind of like you have to get used to each one separately.
Well, and especially like I could imagine in a game like VTOL, it would be a particular, it would be especially difficult just because like you are modeling the player's body to some extent within the game, and like you're trying to model the hands and the arms and such. And yeah, using a Vive controller like the wands versus an Oculus Touch, for example, one mimics like the hand itself, while the other is kind of more kind of a pseudo extension of the hand. So, and we only, I mean, to be fair, we played using the Vive wands, and everything seemed really intuitive. But one of the things I was thinking about was, I wonder how this would feel if I was using a touch controller or something that more replicated a hand rather than like. I mean, that said, like I said, I thought you did a really good job of making the wands feel like I didn't feel like it was like I was. It felt like a natural extension of my hand, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, you're also an Oculus owner, so I feel like you would probably do that with a lot of games where every time you jump into something, you just really think about, I wonder how it would be on the Rift, and vice versa.
Yeah. But just as a developer, like I playing VTOL with Vive wands worked really well, I thought, and yeah, I could just imagine that being kind of like a challenge for you, and I could see how it would help to have more standardized controllers.
I'm actually curious, how intensive or involved of a project is it to add, a new controller to the mix? Because obviously, Valve is working on their knuckle controllers, and then HTC's, they released like the trackers, which I've seen some videos, some footage of people using like these tracking gloves with them. So, if people wanted to be able to utilize those in the game, not that I'm forcing you or making you commit to do it. I'm just curious, what type of process is that? And I'm asking as somebody who has no development experience at all in any field. But with all, like you were talking about, I don't see this problem necessarily going away. If we want to call it a problem, I don't see it going away in the near future with all these different platforms kind of popping up. So what is that process like for you? How does it affect you, and how do you navigate through that? Like what's the decision-making process like? Will you be, doing stuff for the Steam controllers, et cetera, things like that?
Well, like starting off, I kind of was just only focused on the Vive wands. Mostly just because that's all I had, but it was also like the shape of the wand worked perfectly for like how the joystick works, because you can just pivot it off the bottom of the wand. But then when I got around to getting the Oculus, it wasn't too much of a problem to convert it over, because like it worked good enough. Like the controller isn't as long, so you can't like pivot it like a joystick as much.
Gotcha. Okay.
But like everything kind of like luckily the Steam VR plugin for Unity works automatically on an Oculus if you wrote it for a Vive. Other than the thumbstick difference. So all I had to do is basically make the thumbstick work since it didn't have a touchpad. But as for going forward, I really have no idea until I can get my hands on those
fair enough
devices.
Okay, no, fair point. Like I said, I was just curious because you're obviously not the only developer that has to worry about that. Every time a new controller or some type of device comes out, I feel like that throws a wrench in everybody's plans because you have to account for it and account for the folks that do end up getting that but still want to be able to play the game. You know what I mean? But I guess we'll see. We'll kind of see how that all plays out when they do start coming out. Well, so we had just a couple more questions for you. I want to be respectful of your time, but maybe a couple more questions if that's all right.
Yeah, sure.
So I know we spoke a little bit about the future of VTOL and where you're planning to go with the game, but I wanted to look a little bit further than that, and I just kind of ask you straight up, like, are you sold on VR? Would you ever consider developing another VR gamer experience once you're done with VTOL, whenever that is? I'm talking about like years out. Yeah, I'm just curious from your perspective now, like, is it tough to go back to two-dimensional or screens when you've developed for, something in virtual reality, and what that experience has been like for you, and if it sold you on wanting to make that kind of the direction you go in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally hooked on virtual reality, so that's where I'm going to focus on even after VTOL VR.
Cool, man. And I know we spoke about VTOL, all the cool things you have coming up for it. But I guess we got one more question, which is essentially just a shameless plug where, where's the best place that people can find you? It sounds like Reddit is a top spot, but wanted to give you an opportunity to plug other areas or social media or things like that that you'd want people to provide feedback with as you go through the early access process.
Sure. I have a Discord channel where I talk to testers and just anyone that's interested, and we have like a little channel for learning how to fly better called just Flight School.
Great name.
So the Discord channel, it's kind of hard to link that because it's like weird.
No, so you can send that to me, and I'll make sure to throw it in the show notes. And I can essentially put in any links that you want me to in the show notes, and people will be able to click through from there.
Okay, cool. So I also have a YouTube channel where I post development, like log videos. So I can link that too.
Perfect. Yeah, no, we'll definitely make sure to put that on there. I know other developers have done that in the past, but I don't think anyone has ever told us to link to their YouTube channel. So this will be awesome because I definitely want to follow along with what you got going on.
Yep.
Awesome, Paolo. Well, we want to thank you so much for the time, man. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh yeah, best of luck moving forward with the game. You have support from Ronnie and I if you ever need anything, and just know that we're rooting for you, man. We really like what you've done so far, and I know I'm not the only one because I'm kind of paraphrasing from a lot of the reviews that I saw for the game on Steam. I really do feel like you're pioneering. I'm sorry, let me say that properly. You're pioneering into some really cool spaces for VR and flight sim and just that whole genre because a lot of people are excited about the game, not just us. And so, we definitely wish you the best moving forward, and definitely, keep in touch and let us know when the full release comes around.
Thank you so much.